Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Alicia from Alicia B Creative, and we are back yet again with another Tumbler tutorial. Today's tutorial was actually inspired by the outfit worn by Mary J. Blige during the Super Bowl halftime show. So as many of you watched that show, I'm sure you recognize the gorgeous outfit that she was wearing, and I instantly was inspired to recreate this on a cup. So of course, everything I use in today's tutorial will be listed and linked down in the description box down below. You will even find some discount codes down in the description box as well of a lot of the products that I like to use in my everyday Tumbler world. So let's go ahead and jump right into today's tutorial. Alright guys, so today's tutorial is definitely going to be a fun one. So today I am using a 32 ounce plump that is already prepped and painted from the Steel Magnolia. These are my absolute favorite to use because I don't have to do any prep work whatsoever to go ahead and get started on my design. So for this design, I'm going to be creating a deep V on the front half of the cup, and this is to mimic or look like the cross pattern that Mary J. Blige had on the front side of her leopard print outfit. So I am just using my blue painter's tape, and I'm just creating a very general V. So I'm sure you guys can probably tell that sometimes I do things the hard way. I definitely made this a little bit difficult for myself because I wasn't doing any sort of measuring. A really quick and easy way to be able to get a perfect V on your tumbler is to just use a piece of paper. So if you use a piece of computer paper and just cut that into a triangle by just folding the two corners in half, it is much easier to get the deep V that I was going for than having to kind of play around with it with my tape. So I did have to play around with this a little bit just to make sure that it was a little bit even on the front side and the back side. So it took a couple tries before I finally was able to get it the way that I wanted it to look. So as soon as I am done laying all of my painter's tape out, I'm then just going to trim up the bottom portion of the V to just get obviously that perfect point down at the bottom of the tumbler before I'm going to go ahead and move into the next step in the process. So now that my tumbler is all taped off, I'm going to go ahead and mix up my glitters. So I'm going to do a white custom mix here. So I'm using Mistletoe Kisses from Maestra Creations. Then I'm using Flurry, SE Flurries, and Paris, all from Peachy Olive Glitters. So with my custom mixes, I don't typically mix. I don't typically measure, I mean to say. I just kind of pour to my heart's content. I know that I need probably a good size amount to cover this large of a cup, and I know that I'll have a bit left over, which is fine because I can use this extra custom mix in a future mold. So I use about equal parts of the first three white glitters, and then Paris, I was a little bit like less heavy-handed with that. I do go back in and add more, as you'll see here, because I wasn't sure how much of that holographic silver I wanted to add to my mix. So I added probably about 5 mLs of Paris and then probably about 10 mLs of each of the other three glitters. So that's what that custom mix looks like, and we're going to go ahead and get this on the cup. Okay, so I'm going to be applying Mod Podge to the back half of this tumbler. So that is where my custom glitter mix is going to go. I'm using my favorite brushes, which are the Wet n Wild brushes from the Dollar Tree. These are actually makeup brushes, but they're so soft and it really does make for easy application of Mod Podge, so you don't see all of those brush strokes. So definitely my favorite brushes to use. So I'm just going to apply a generous coat of Mod Podge there, making sure it's nice and even before I go ahead and dump my custom mix all over the back side of this cup. So because we're using Mod Podge and not epoxy method, I will have to go in and do a second coat of glitter, which is perfectly fine, but you definitely want to make sure that you let your first coat of Mod Podge dry completely before you go in with that second coat. So I'm just going to put that on all of the sides of that tumbler, and then we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of Mod Podge on the bottom portion of this cup. So for the bottom portion of the cup, I'm just going to do a thin layer of Mod Podge, and I'm only going to add the glitter SE Flurries. So SE Flurries is a fine white glitter, and typically I like to put fine glitters on the bottom portion of my cup so I don't have any trouble with jagged glitter as I go into epoxying the cup. So I'm going to let that dry, do a second coat of epoxy, and then second coat of Mod Podge rather. After I've done my second coat of Mod Podge, while it's still a little bit wet, I will go ahead and take a piece of parchment paper paper and roll that out. And this is just going to help me to flatten all of my chunky glitter so I don't have to apply so many coats of epoxy. So now that this is dry, I've let this dry for probably about an hour before I'm going to brush this off. You could also speed up this process with a heat gun to get the Mod Podge to dry so you can go ahead with the other glitter that we're going to be applying next. So I'm going to remove the blue painter's tape that was covering up my V, and for this section of the cup, I'm going to be applying a fine white glitter. We're actually going to use SE Flurries again here, and I'm going to be applying this to the tumbler with Tack It method. So now that I have removed all of the blue painter's tape, I'm going to go ahead and pour a little bit of Tack It into a medicine cup. I don't ever dilute my Tack It, it's just my personal preference. You can certainly dilute your Tack It if you choose to. I just find that for me, there's no real difference if I dilute or not. So to save myself the extra trouble and hassle, I just pour that directly into a medicine cup to apply. So once that Tack It is applied, I'm going to take my heat gun to speed up the process of getting my Tack It to dry so that it is in the tacky phase, so that I can go ahead and use my white glitter, which is the SE Flurries here, and pour that all over that Tack It applied section. I absolutely love SE Flurries. It's really a beautiful white glitter, very similar to Fairy Dust, which is also one of my personal favorites that I love to use. So once I put that glitter back, I'm then just going to use my hand and I'm just going to rub over just this section here that has the Tack It applied to really flatten and burnish that glitter down into the Tack It so that it is nice and flat. I do also want to mention that I did go in and do a second coat of Tack It over this and apply a second coat of glitter because I did have a couple bald spots that I managed to need to cover up with that second coat. Once the Mod Podge and Tack It was dry, I did make sure to clear gloss spray my cup a couple times before I put it on the turner. And once it was on the turner, I did apply 2 full coats of epoxy to my cup, and that was about 40 mLs each for this 32-ounce plump. And then now we're going to go ahead and start to add all of our decals. So the leopard print that I'm using today is one of my favorite leopard prints to use. This is Fuzzy Leopard Print from Bear Trends Digi Designs. This is the only leopard print that I typically will use for any of my cups. It is my absolute favorite to use. I will definitely make sure to link that down in the description box as well. So I have cut my leopard print out on this chrome silver adhesive vinyl that I've had. I believe that this is a Cricut brand vinyl. That is also linked down in the description box for you should you choose to get this exact color. Typically it comes in a pack of 3 with I think gold, silver, and I want to say like a black. This one I picked up was just the roll of silver, but I do also know that it comes in a 3-pack. So I'm just going to finish weeding out all of these pieces of leopard print so that we can get this ready to apply to the cup. So after I've gotten that section all weeded, I'm just going to also weed my lines. So I will put the measurements as well as the description box. I didn't add the Cricut Design Space piece to this just because it was a very basic print or cutting situation for all of my decals for today. So I am going to grab my cup now and we're going to do any necessary sanding that I need. Again, this cup has already had 2 really thick coats of epoxy applied to it, so there's not a whole lot of sanding other than a few sharp bits down around the bottom, a couple along the side, and then of course we want to focus on that top rim to make sure that we have a nice fine line of stainless steel for our final coats of epoxy to adhere to. So I'm just going to really vigorously sand this until I have exactly what I need, which is a nice smooth surface. I'll go upstairs and wash this in the sink with dish soap and water and then get ready for my decals. So the very first thing I'm going to apply are my chrome lines along the V of my cup. So the lines that I cut here are 11.5 in width by 0.20 in height, and that is the thickness of this line that I'm using here. So I'm just going to cover the V on both sides in the silver or chrome color first, and then I'm going to go over these lines with a white vinyl line. So my white vinyl line was thinner than my silver lines, and that line was 11.5 wide by 0.10 in width or in height, and that was exactly half of the width of the first line, so it was a perfect match right through the center of that line. So I'm just going to get these white lines applied to my tumbler right over top of the silver chrome. When you're doing this, it's not too difficult, but one tip I would say is that just to make sure that you're kind of guiding the line. Sometimes you have to kind of trace your finger along that line when you're kind of doing that doubling up of lines to make sure that it is even right through the cup. So this section here, I'm using lines that are 11 and a half by the 0.10 in the chrome, and this section was a bit tricky. So what I'm trying to create is kind of that cross pattern look on the front half of this cup here. And so the most difficult part of this was to get where the two lines intersect in the center directly in the middle of my V-split. So I did have to play around with this a little bit. I wanted to make sure that obviously the cross section of the lines was even and followed kind of that straight seam right down the middle of the V. So it did take me a little bit of time, a couple of tries to really get this right. So I did have to play with this a little bit to make sure that I was getting my lines nice and even and straight. Usually I would use my cup cradle for when I'm doing any sort of line work, but because I was doing this crossover hatch pattern, it was much more difficult to try and do it on my cup cradle, so it just made it easier to lay the tumbler directly on the table. So I'm just going to continue to play with my lines until I get the perfect crosses all the way down the center line of the cup, and then I'm going to take my craft knife and just cut all of the excess vinyl lines all over that section to make sure that I have everything within my 2 V lines. Once that is finished, I'm going to take my chrome leopard print here, and I'm just going to hand place all of these pieces. You could use transfer tape, but you do need the stronger transfer tape with this type of vinyl just because it doesn't stick to the regular transfer tapes. So I'm just going to continue down along the back side of the cup and apply all of these chrome silver leopard print spots. This is a lot of fun. I love hand placing more so than using my transfer tape because you really can pick and choose where you want everything to go. And now that that's completely done, I am going to take a little bit of the Minwax polyacrylic, which I'll put a picture of right here, and I'm going to seal all of my vinyl in there to make sure that I have no lifting during the final coat of epoxy. So of course you guys know that now that this is done, this will go back on the turner for 2 final coats of Amazing Clear Cast Plus for my final coats of epoxy to make sure that I have that added UV protection, and then this is the final look of the cup. I know this week's tutorial was a short one, but I could not wait to get that design on a cup. So if you did enjoy today's tutorial, definitely make sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again next week.